So good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for choosing to spend an hour with us. I really appreciate and extremely value your time. So thank you once again. So we're going to take about 45 minutes to 50 minutes for this session. And today we're going to talk pretty much, well, we're calling this Defence League against cyber attacks, but we're going to talk about what the state of email security is today, some tactics, systems and solutions to be able to overcome them, and also we'll make it a lot more of a discussion point. The reason we've chosen this webinar style is so that you are able to unmute yourself and ask questions at any point across the panel. Myself, Richard and Mikey, who will do a quick introduction. So please do ask questions. This definitely is not a one-way webinar. So just moving into important information. You are not in listen-only mode. I should have changed that, but there is a Q&A at the end of the session. We do have a Q&A feature as well, so please also ask questions if you're not comfortable coming off mute. And we will be the session is completely recorded, so please avoid yourself from any swearing just in case. This is live, as I said, you can come off mute to ask any questions at the same time. So just going into quick introductions. My name is George McKenna. I'm the head of cloud sales here at Ultima, and I lead effectively sort of the cloud sales portfolio. So what that really covers is everything that is basically licensed rather than a physical piece of tin. So Mimecast and a lot of security this day and age really is all moving into subscription offerings, which falls under my remit. So it's an absolute pleasure to host this session with Mikey. So Mikey, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So Mikey Mulfesis, I'm a senior sales engineer at Mimecast and been around with Mimecast for a good couple of years. But before that, I was involved in a lot of enterprise architectures based on messaging platforms, directory infrastructures, migrations to clouds, etc. So I've got over 20 years of experience in the IT industry, from the simple I Love You virus that came out a good 25 years ago to the real sophisticated types of threats that are coming out today. So looking forward to having the discussions. And over to you, Richard.
Oh, you're on mute, Rich.
I always love the irony of that. Hi, my name is Richard. I'm a computer expert. I occasionally forget about the mute button. I am founder of Antisocial Engineer, a company that specialised in social engineering. And as of about four and a half months ago, Ultima security kind of extraordinaire, trying to piece together the kind of problem from human risk within organizations, making sure they're a bit more resilient. And yeah, some of that sophisticated stuff is kind of my bread and butter, testing. So primarily I'm a tester. That's where my passions are. And it comes from years of auditing companies from a social engineering perspective, trying to find these weaknesses and just looking where we can make some changes within the company, basically. So that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, both. Mikey, over to you if you want to kick off.
So why are we all here today? Annually, Mimecast conducts a state of email security survey to a couple of hundreds, thousands of people globally. It is actually our 6th annual report today, where we had surveyed over 1,400 IT decision makers globally. And when we talk about globally, it's typically where Mimecast has presence, but not only presence of a data center, it's also where our customers are. Obviously, we've got customers based in different regions where the data is residing. So this discussion is going to be statistic heavy, but it's good statistics, because often when I engage in discussions, people say, well, what else is happening? What are the trends in the industry? What should I really be looking at? I typically know what is happening in my bubble or in my environment where I am, but I really need to understand what's going on. And this is where Richard, George, and myself have had these discussions to say, well, we've got the statistics, we've done the interviews, but don't just listen to us. Let's see what it really is happening out there, and let's open up these discussions going forward. Now, one of the things that when we conducted the survey about 5 years ago, right, at that stage, only 58% of board members considered cyber-based threats as a significant risk to their organizations, right? So if you let that sink in, just over half of the board members considered cyber threats what could really significantly hurt their organizations. That stat in our survey towards the end of last year has now increased to 88%. So it's just showing now that cyber threats are getting the attention it needs at board level. And those are the types of discussions we want to have, right? So if we move on, there's no doubting that the digital workforce is under attack, right? In our surveys that we had conducted, and I've had this discussion with many people, a lot of people keep coming up and saying, but is email still relevant in an industry? Is email still important? We've got other collaboration tools out there. We've got different ways of communicating, right? In our discussions with people, 79% of the respondents said that in the past year, they had noticed a significant increase in email volumes into their organizations. And that is reality. It's the quickest way to communicate with anybody in an organization, get data across. But out of that, we also need to consider that of the respondents, 75% of respondents had acknowledged that they in some way or form were hurt by ransomware attack. Now, it's not to say that the entire organization was taken out or that the ransomware came through via email. It could also be different ways that it could come through. Richard, the social engineering perspectives, etc. There's different ways that it could come in. So we're saying when people responded to say they were hurt by ransomware, it's not a total outage, but it just shows that with the increase in email coming through, ransomware is still one of the prevalent forms of attacks coming through. George, any comments around that?
No, I think it's fascinating actually that we find ourselves with the amount of collaboration tools we have, that email is still the default that an organization will resort to, even after COVID.
And will be as well for probably, I'd guess, another 10 years. Like we can see, like email's very similar to kind of text messages as well. You know, the technology, you know, kind of like the chap invented emails, kind of called Ray back in 1971. 1973 it trickled out for public use, and the thing is, it kind of, as historic as it is, show me a modern messaging app and I'll show you the email that it's used to log people in or join as part of that process or update you throughout the use of using Slack, etc. And I think just because something has been proven to be like kind of ineffective, it's antiquated in a way. There's far better replacements. We'll still see email at the core of businesses for at least 10 years, very similar to text messages, where by 2000s they were definitely done with, and there were better choices then. The second MSN Messenger came out, etc., and ICQ should have replaced text messages but didn't. So we see these kind of problems sticking with us, and it is ultimately because humans find it really easy. You know, from the very first time you could fly from Singapore to London and log in and get your emails, that convenience, it's here to stay, and it's only become more and more part of how we work. So yeah, it's shocking stats, but I think what's going to be scary is when we're seeing these stats get worse over the next few years as we continue to clutch on to these technologies that are kind of ineffective but work, and kind of people make money on the back of email every day. I've sent at least 10 already. So yeah, as much as I hate the things, not going anywhere yet.
So it's interesting points that you raise there, and this is just 3 of the biggest email security challenges that the respondents had responded to in the year 2021. So it's not saying it's the only challenges or you know, there isn't anything else out there, but interesting points to say that over half of the respondents said that the increase in the sophistication of the threats coming through has increased. And why is that? Well, you know, if you look at the attackers, if you look at the people with the malicious intent, if you shut one door, they're not going to say, oh, well, you know what, well done, George, we're not going to try and continue attack. They're going to change the way. They're constantly adapting to the way that they're doing the attacks. And with the sophistication, it's awesome. If we especially, well, it's not awesome, but it's interesting the way that it's going, especially the way that the world is moving. It's no longer 10 years ago, you used to think of it that it was a teenager just sitting with a hoodie over their heads in a dark room in their house and attacking. You're starting to get nation states attacking each other. They're making that available on the internet. About 2 weeks ago, I saw something on the internet that somebody had published on Twitter and said, would you like to find out how we invaded the Iranian energy stations? Here is the code. So people are saying, right, this is how we got in there. Download it, go ahead, and you can do everything. But on that, and we're going to discuss it a little bit further around cyber resiliency, where IT budgets also come into play. But something very near and dear to my heart is that 40% of respondents have said that employees' naivety around security is one of the biggest risk security challenges that they have. George, you and I have had discussions around this before, and your opinions on that.
Yeah, I think it actually goes back to Richard's point of email being around since, well, basically before I was born, which is an inherent underlying problem with the technology itself, that we still use it today, that it is so exploitable. And naivety sets in with familiarity, right? If it's become so familiar, your guard will always drop. And email is one of those modes of communication where actually it's as familiar as opening a letter in your mailbox every morning inside your home, right? You feel safe inside your house. Opening an email is exactly the same. And it does, and this is where Richard will definitely probably step in a little bit more, but we use email across so many different devices, the way we view emails, that actually subversion and deception in email is such an easy thing to do. If I open an email on my phone, I see a name, it doesn't show me the email address, it just shows me the name. And there's all sorts of different things, and it's so easy to be, with the amount of technology, to actually fall into that trap of not nice or naive, but you're over familiar and easy, right?
Like I guess this is where I should feel guilt, because it's like it offered me that getting people to fall into them traps. And you're right with the sophistication. The look, like in a nutshell, kind of we've pushed, whether right or wrong, we've pushed a lot of choices for security down to the user and the person that should be benefiting from this technology. And whether it's naivety or kind of lack of training or lack of support, or whatever that may be, I disagree with probably naive. Yeah, I don't think everyone's naive to all risks. I think you become less naive when you understand them and when you actually get to grips with it. But yeah, we've been pushed into this. It's not a case of, we mentioned hoodies in bedrooms earlier. Well, now the hoodies have offices and become consultants, and it becomes more and more of a sophisticated risk as these threats become mature over the years. And the kind of, as we've made other systems more and more secure, we've added MFA, we've added hardware keys, we've made it that the only way into a lot of companies is through kind of people, kind of being able to, to dupe them. And so, yeah, that's why I think we're seeing a lot more sophistication, because it has to, because, even, with the likes of Mimecast, I kind of admittedly almost enemies with Mimecast, because as I try and send in phishing emails to companies, you've got systems like Mimecast, kind of making it harder to get that email into the inbox. So you have to be more tactful, and you have to really constantly fight these technology changes, things that are there to secure us. But yeah, shocking stats with the only thing I'd probably not disagree on, but just it's definitely a conversation starter, is the 40%. I love a stat from a few years ago where it was 80% of the UK workforce don't get any kind of formal training when it comes to emails or cybersecurity. So it's quite hard to say if they're naive or just uneducated.
Richard, it's actually good to be your enemy in that aspect to show that we are stopping a lot of those threats. But it leads us into the next point around the respondents that had seen some form of data leak going out or something like that, right? 90% of them had said the internal threats of data leaks were due to careless or negligent employees. And this is a good story, and it's actually one of my colleagues that likes using the expression that users are like water. They're going to find the path of least resistance, right? There's actually a story where there's an organization where we had assisted and we had stopped a specific URL going through, and everything was awesome. We kept blocking the user from doing this. Eventually, the user emailed the person on their private email address, got the URL and sent that URL to their private email address, all using corporate email. So this is where we're talking about. It's not necessarily saying that they're deliberately doing it, but sometimes users just don't understand. And when I talk users, it's not just users. I'm also talking from IT perspective, right? Even the people that think we are great, we'll never be duped, we'll never be caught out or anything, right? We do. You have that momentary lapse in judgment, specifically on emails coming through. George, you mentioned earlier about reading emails on your phone. As you can hear from my accent, I'm not a native from the UK. I come from South Africa, and over there, we don't really have a lot of public transport. And when we're sitting in traffic in our cars, what do I normally do? I used to catch up on emails over there. And it's very quick. I would read an email and go, yes, action, do this, without having the big screen in front of me to understand what really is going on. So a lot of the worst mistakes that respondents came back to is the use of collaboration tools. And that goes back into the accelerated way that organizations brought things up with COVID, that they had to bring collaboration tools, the likes of chat protocols coming into play, email moving to the cloud, making sure that users were able to work remotely, etc. But because IT departments were accelerated that quick, sometimes the security was still put in place, but not as aggressive or as planned or as thought out as what you normally would do. So much so that 83% of organizations had gone in and put in poor password hygienes just to make sure their users could work remotely. George, I see you nodding quite aggressively over there, agreeing with those stats.
I've got an absolute killer story on this one, George, actually.
Yeah, go ahead, go on.
Momentary mishaps. I just couldn't get over the cultural differentiation of checking your phone whilst caught up in traffic. I guess, yeah, if you're stationary, stationary. But yeah, literally last week, was in a situation where we'd sent a email to someone within a company. The reply came back almost instant, so I was kind of happy. It must have landed in inbox. They had no mail gateway security like at all, so using kind of the kind of standard GoDaddy style kind of DNS and mail. And basically the email then kind of offered me that conversation where I could speak to someone senior within a business, and a telephone call was placed, and like in the following minutes we were starting to talk about this 8-digit code that I needed to be retrieved from the email. And at that moment a tech took over, kind of took over, and I thought it was the end of the conversation, really. So someone senior in the business was on the phone to me. I'm literally lying to them, trying to get them to give me this 8-digit code as part of a simulation, and they passed me over to the IT person. So I assumed then at that point it would be end of the game, and just by keeping going and some more conversation, we were able to to gain access to that person's mailbox. The IT person validated me and then passed me back on, and I got that code. But kind of that whole situation, when we talk about sophistication, quite a sophisticated, like if I do blow my own trumpet, there were several elements. There was a like a fictitious email, there was some spoofing going on, there was a conversation, so quite a sophisticated targeted attack. But when you trace that right back to the start, it's in me asking for 5 minutes of their time, of an email sent from an Outlook account that was 6 hours old, which should have been stopped. So when kind of humans get involved, they can sometimes be aware of these stats, but they can sometimes overrule that. And that's the kind of things that I like email filtering for, basically, because it won't catch everything, but it is an idea to get this into, that attack exactly would have been stopped with something quite simple.
George, and your thoughts about enabling unsecured collaboration toolings, etc.?
I'm good. This is funny about Mike, because Mikey and I actually had to do some unsecured collaboration to get some of the work done. I think it's a really interesting, it's an interesting premise. and it's something I actually learned from a CSIS a while ago. It's the phrase of, how do we securely enable people to work fluidly? And it's interesting using the analogy of water, right? Water always flows downhill, we'll always find a way. It's very easy with security to lock down, right? And to really restrict users' behaviors. The question is does behavior inhibit productivity? And which is what we need to really, as organization owners and leadership within businesses need to and want, is as higher productivity, productive staff as possible. And it doesn't surprise me in any shape or form that users will find a way by using tertiary collaboration platforms, because the platforms we give our users are so restrictive. So it's really interesting. What we need to do is really take a step back and actually go back to the phrase of, how do we securely enable people to be productive? And the use of collaboration tools is one of the biggest ones that we need to be able to do. We can bring it back to Mimecast specifically, right? Email is a specific one, but when we share web links, what are we doing when we're using multiple devices, when we send people links or receive links from different users, right? How are we protecting our users from being able to access, a OneDrive link, which could be made to look like a work link, but actually it's completely not, right? And that's where pretty much platforms is why we partner with Mimecast. Specifically, obviously, this is why we have social engineering element to our business of security, is because we have the preventative, but we also have we really drive the education, right? The tools are there to be able to catch and not just careless or negligent employees. And I'd always say negligent employees is a very stark connotation, but actually just busy employees, right? People are busy, and they can become negligent in not in a more positive connotation through the fact of their productivity. Worst mistakes are back to poor password hygiene. I think it's more fatigue from a protective having to change on a monthly basis, right? We're now moving into passwordless states, right? VPN-less environments. We're moving into passphrases or however or fingerprints even, right? Using our phones and multi-factor authentications. I think it's actually an onus on us as an organization and as organizations to provide environments where actually we're using the most secure technology, such as fingerprints and so on, not having to actually be reliant so much necessarily on passwords themselves, but they're just some of my viewpoints. Anything else I'd, Rich, Mikey?
Yeah, so George, it's actually quite interesting. I mean, if we look at one of the recent cyber breaches that happened from an e-hailing service company, right? They had the technologies that you're talking about in place, about the multi-factor, etc. But going back to what Richard was talking about earlier, that social engineering perspective, the attacker formed such a relationship with the employee in that organization that they said, well, if you want this to stop, just give me the code that you quickly received. There was that trust that was put in place, right? And there we go, it went through. So although there's so many tools out there, there's fatigue not only from the users, there's fatigue from the IT administrators as well. Every time something new comes through, a new patch that needs to be done, etc., etc. And this is where we also look at, it's a community defense. Not one tool is going to defend you 100%, right? You need you need to get the best of breed tools at the layers that you want to protect. And at times, for example, a Mimecast working with other tools work well to protect at the gateway layer, at the perimeter, at the inside of your environment. But now, something that I also want to mention around here is that the cost of a ransomware payout has drastically increased in the last year, right? The year before, so in the year 2020, in our previous survey, the cost of a ransomware payout that organizations paid out was averaging in the US $312,000. Last year, that jumped up to $570,000 per ransomware payout. Okay, now it's another topic that I could debate. Unfortunately, we've only got an hour over here, but it's a topic I could debate ad nauseum on, right? Ransomware, 64% of organizations that were hit with ransomware paid the ransom. Now, before I jump into that, George, and hand over to you, because I think you and I we touched the iceberg on this discussion. You become an easy target around that, right? Out of the 64% of the organizations that paid the ransom, only 39% of them, 39% of them received their data back, which means 61% got the got it all. Oh, sorry, I've tongue twisted myself over there. 39% paid and did not get the data back. 61% got the data back, right? Now let that figure just sit on the side about the 61%. But the people that didn't pay the data, only 32% of organizations had strategies in place and their data correctly backed up and methods and resiliency in place that they were able to recover from an attack. Okay, now George, before I hand over to you on there, I just want to bring out another stat that I had read the other day from the State of Email Security report as well. On average, organizations that are hit with ransomware that have good strategies in place are physically down for 2 to 3 days. Other organizations, larger organizations, could typically be down for a week. In some cases, some organizations have been down for 2 weeks at a time, that they cannot operate purely because of strategies that they had in place. Now, to bring it back to the 61% of organizations that paid the ransom and got their data back, your opinions on that, George, of paying the ransom?
Well, yeah, one is paying the ransom. I think, well, I don't necessarily agree with paying the ransom, but I understand the desperation of having the reason why you would do it. I think a lot of customers, especially in the UK market, are probably a little bit more mature, right? And this is definitely more within the mid-market space. It comes down to a couple of things: is what does the cost of paying the punt of actually paying the ransomware, right, over taking 3-4 days of getting it back. If you can unlock it within an hour and you've got the change in your back pocket, then you're going to pay it. And if you don't get it back, then you've still got to go through the pain. We all want to be in a position, right, where if we are, God forbid, actually get attacked with ransomware and it locks down some data that is extremely valuable to us or the operation of the business, then we are in a position and we have the systems in place to be able to unlock it. I think paying it, and then you are then forever going to be a target, maybe not for the same cyber attack group, but definitely for you have your information passed to others, and you probably have a part of a serial one. I think you see it actually as users. If you know your data's been on a website, you're on a website and it gets hacked, and then all of a sudden you start getting lots of spam or you start getting lots of phishing. Like I started to receive actually quite a lot of text messages pretending, and I must have made it onto some register somewhere, because all of a sudden I started getting loads of emails and text messages. I think the ability to recover from attack is the most important, because per hour that your business is down, you're lost to revenue, and it's really important that you have absolute preventative technologies in place, and the ROI on those are pretty straightforward. It's the education.
Yeah.
Go on, Rich.
Yeah, no, it's just like literally I always try and steer the debate around paying ransoms or not paying ransoms or the impact of this. It's a interesting conversation to have. You always get different opinions and whether you should or shouldn't. It's not ever that simple. It's always down to the person. It's always down to the organization. So, well and good not paying a ransom, but what if you're a hospital? What if there's 10 people kind of imminently going to die if you don't? Sometimes the decision isn't our choice to make, and it's just like always quite funny seeing how people do with that. But it's a bit like debating if God forbid I was driving home tonight. It's a bit like debating whether I wear a jumper or a coat just in case I go through the window. There's a lot of there's a lot of feelings. I'd probably wear a helmet if I was going through the window, but it'd be far easier to wear a seatbelt, right? So this is that time where we should divert attentions. If you ever hear the conversation whether we should pay ransoms or don't, please just divert them back into, well, let's avoid that situation. And it's always important to think about it, but building resilience comes from these kind of mindsets where we're building resilience by wearing our seatbelts, by taking preventions. And I think that's where we sometimes get lost when it comes to ransomware, often used as a scary tactic, and it can be condemning for businesses. But every time I hear the ransomware conversation, I just love to steer it to more towards the the infection, more more towards that kind of kill chain kind of like conversation about how it got in. Was it a mixture of education? Was it just email, etc.? So yeah, always an interesting conversation, ransomware. But you can tell the maturity of a company when they start to talk about in terms of resilience, uptime, as George said, kind of, how much are we going to be impacted. When a company's calculated their hourly downtime by an average ransomware attack, and they've done some research into what servers would be down and what wouldn't, I think that's quite a good sign of maturity, that you've actually, you've planned for that event rather than just flying through the window, as it were, kind of thinking, oh, like as an afterthought. Always a good time to to see what people's views are on this as well. Kind of, if anyone's listening, please jump in, because it's not just what I think of ransomware as a tester, or kind of George is that expert in the area, like on Mike. Like it's a case of like if anyone's got any like interesting angles on ransomware, do chuck it in.
Richard, while people are either typing comments or if anybody wants to come off mute, just let us know. But you raised a very interesting point around there, and it leads us very nicely into the next point about cyber resilience. Is it keeping up with new dangers, right? We've got a stat over there that 53% do not have a cyber resilience strategy. But when we talk about that, I'm going to bring it back to a UK perspective. 38% have a cyber resilience strategy in place. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot that 38% of organizations have a cyber resilience strategy. But Richard, you touched on very important points over there. The previous year, that stat was 45% of organizations had a cyber resilience strategy. The year before that, it was 49% of organizations. Now, why is that on the downward spiral, right? It's not that companies are not doing it anymore. There's a lot of new tools coming into play. There's a lot of new things that have come into play that companies are now looking at it and saying, with the awareness of cyber attacks going to the board level, with the awareness that organizations are now reporting on the different types of cyber threats out there, IT departments are going back and saying, well, are we adequately protected? Do we have an adequate cyber resilience strategy? So that 38% where I spoke about in the UK that they have a cyber resilience strategy, right? It doesn't mean that it's the other 62% do not have. It means they have, but they are busy revisiting it because of the new types of sophistication of threats coming into play. But on that, only 14% of IT budgets in the UK are assigned towards a cyber resilience strategy. And cyber resilience, the way that we look at it is, it's not a case of if you're going to be attacked. Companies have moved to the point of when am I going to be attacked? And when I am going to be attacked, what methods do I have to recover, to protect my brand, which we're going to get onto a little bit later, to make sure the ROI that my workforce is coming into place. It's not just a case of you can't do business anymore with your customers and people aren't paying you anymore. You're still paying staff. You're still paying a workforce out there of thousands of people that can no longer work, but you still have to continue paying them. George, thoughts around the cyber resilience strategies out there?
Do you know, it's an interesting and it's so relevant. Everyone who's on the call, I'm not sure of all of your entirety of your roles or your roles or responsibilities, but to have a cyber resilience strategy is the response from definitely all the organisations that I have the privilege of spending time with. It is absolutely a responsibility in 22 going into 23 to have a resilience strategy in place. It's not a time where it is so prevalent. We have so many different modes of communication. We have ingress and egress points all over the place, from the cloud to specific SaaS applications to email specifically in this environment, where our threat landscape is so broad that we need to have plans in place to understand how we tier our data, and also to the value that data has to the business, and how much we spend on, how much loss would we have to the loss to us being held ransom to any particular data point, so that we can have a rollback strategy. And it's really important that we look at one of our partners we work with, their understanding of of your businesses and the industry, but also the technologies from user all the way through to platforms. Because actually, as it says, 33% experience financial loss due to lack of a cyber resilience strategy. And it's quite true, actually. 1 in 3 absolutely will.
That is the stat, right? That is the back to money, which is often, for businesses, that core focus, right? Whether we, like I don't want to sound like an anti-capitalist or anything, but a business has an objective, a pledge of allegiance to shareholders, to prioritize profits, right? That is the harsh reality of capitalism, and it's a case of we're not really. We should be respectful of ransomware, if anything, because it's only until some nefarious characters kind of added a financial value to ransomware, to cybercrime. Because let's not forget, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, cybercrime didn't always have this obvious impact of a business, right? You could be hacked and recover, and maybe it was just kids. But now they've attached this financial value to the impact. And we start talking about how long we're going to be down for, how resilient we are, kind of in an alternative universe. I think we should almost never respect them too much because they are criminals at the end of the day, but it's a case of we should learn from that, how businesses do change. In a way, I like to think that this is the bad thing before the good thing, as it were. If you take global warming as an example, it takes a lot of people to be clued up to a small degree change to think this is actually indicative of a much bigger problem, and we start to do something. And I hope cybercrime takes that lead when we start looking at ransomware, kind of thinking this is the tip of the iceberg. This, could potentially lose a lot of business and a lot of money going forward. And we start to resolve that, and we start to kind of take it for what it is. And we start to think about return on investments and businesses and how resilient we are, all going back to money, whether we like it or kind of hate it. But, it should be a concern for businesses that, it's not just this untangible kind of impact. It's not someone that's played a joke. It's a real, kind of Bitcoins in the wallet kind of almost like an adventure for a lot of bad businesses. And I think this is going to definitely change going forward. And I think it's being brought into a lot of conversations very much like this at the moment to people. Ransomware, very scary, very impactful. But it is a case of, we should look at the kind of information between the lines and start to see that attackers are becoming more savvy and attaching this financial value to impact. It's becoming much more clinical to extract funds. Kind of no longer do you have to exploit people or kind of, like all these other ways of cashing out of a business. And now we can go straight to ransomware very clinically. You owe me this much money for, this much resilience. So, hopefully changing times. But we wouldn't be the first people to ignore a heeding warning, would we? So fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So Richard, I'm going to touch, and it's going to come up a little bit later, but around the financial side, often people think it's just about the money coming in, right? We've seen the likes of a GDPR coming into play in Europe. We've seen POP here in South Africa. We've seen a whole lot of these policies coming into play where 15 years ago, there could have been cyber attacks, but organizations didn't really go out and publicly say, I'm under attack or anything. Now, they've got a duty that they have to say when they're under attack, because, hey, you also need to look after your clients, which we're going to touch on a little bit later. But just a quick stat that I want to bring up here, part of the resiliency. Now, during the pandemic, Microsoft, a lot of people accelerated moving mailboxes to the cloud, enabled Teams, enabled SharePoint, OneDrive, etc., etc. With it going through there, we asked the people responding to these surveys, had you experienced any form of email outage in the past year? 79% of organizations responded back and said they had experienced some form of outage. Now, not to go into the weeds of it, but from a Microsoft perspective, it's not just email. Email plugs into Azure for authentication. Depends where your auto discovery goes. There's a whole lot of different things that could come into play around the outage. So it's not saying that the Microsoft services went down, but in the case where a group of users or your organization could not access email. What is the impact? How do you stay in communication with people around there? 90% of the respondents came out over there and they said they've noticed a vast improvement in the Microsoft strategies and security and availability in the services out there, but they still said there's additional safeguards that are required around just moving everything to 365. George, thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I can come from a place that being responsible for the Microsoft business within Ultima. The value of that's around 120 million pounds across. It's about 300,000 users, and we're a 14 times gold Microsoft partner. Most of our business is built around Microsoft, but Microsoft will always be the platform. And their design of services and bringing on additional services, Microsoft Defender, Sentinel, are all platform-based specifics. Outside of their platform reach, we will always look to work with tertiary vendors such as Mimecast that will not only just add security outside of the Microsoft ecosystem, but actually add that same level of layer over the top of Microsoft services, which is why it is part of our Microsoft ecosystem that we offer out to all of our customers, being the Mimecast platform. And it's but it's not. It also comes from the place that actually security needs to come from a position of different layers. Yeah, and we can start from education, and then we can look at the different. Then we can look at users and devices and the different mechanisms of authentication, and then we take it another level up, and we're looking at the type of data security. Are we adding different data protections? But then at an organizational level as well. So it's really we cannot be secure and say, okay, well, I have a network security practice which looks at my NetSec, which is physical firewalls, and I give my users VPN access through AnyConnect or whichever VPN platform of choice you're using. That's not necessarily enough, and we come back to the user collaboration tools, right? Which is why we need the spread of tertiary services that sit across our platforms. And it's interesting, Microsoft's biggest contributors to growth of Microsoft services are their tertiary security vendors. The security vendors are the ones that drive the most usage within Microsoft across Azure and Workspace. So, and that's just an interesting stat to take in mind of.
Yeah. So George, leading on to something that I said we're going to touch on a little bit later, and it's come to that part now, right? Online brand protection. Gone are the days where well, definitely from my previous bank, what they used to do on a monthly basis, they used to send an email and say, please note, we'll never ask you for this following information via email, right? And if I was attacked, the bank would come back and say, well, did you not read the email we sent you 3 weeks ago to say, don't do it, right? The entire mindset needs to change. And I've seen it happening from customers, and I've seen it happening from organizations as well. They cannot just rely. If you're trying to get your entire customer base to go more digital, use your digital platforms, do online shopping, do online banking, etc., right? So you don't have that physical touch anymore. Surely you also need to protect those people, but also protect your brand. I mean, an attack coming into your organization, right? What is the impact over there? I've got so many banks I could go to. I've got so many online retailers I could go to. If somebody has leaked my data out there, right, would I stay with them? Would I trust them going forward? And that is the ultimate thing. Do I trust them enough to keep my business there, or should I move on? We've seen that 89% of respondents are looking at tools out there, like a DMARC analyzer type tool, to see who's sending emails on their behalf. But scarily enough, 40% of the respondents said they have insufficient resources. Now, insufficient resources could be classified to finances. It could be classified to actual people working the technologies. You can't just hire one person to constantly manage everything. So that is a bit of a problem. And I'm sure you've got a lot of thoughts around this one, George.
Yeah. Brand, I'm trying to think Richard can do it as well. It's a brand protection. If you're not really looking at a tool like a DMARC analyzer, then I definitely absolutely would be looking at that already. Brand security and brand really come hand in hand. When you're sitting on the board of a business, two things they really care about. One is one of the brand reputation and the money that the business is making, or the risk of not making money. The brand is, when we think about a brand for a business, it isn't actually just about customers or consumers like you and I buying from Tesco's. It's actually the suppliers that are around that make that business what it is, supply all the products or the services, the people, the logistics, the supply chain as a whole. And if we are breached, we have to think about the implication, actually, not just of revenue coming in, but who we can even buy products and services from to sell from our customers, because it can actually affect reputation on both sides if we are not adequately protected at all. You know, just having inadequate protection and someone moving laterally through your network, gaining access to your suppliers' networks and so forth, can just have as much of a reputational break as actually losing out customers' details as well. So it is absolutely something to be absolutely mindful of when you're thinking about security. Isn't just the traffic or the data. It's actually the name the name of the company you're employed with as well.
Yeah. You've got to go back to what brand is as well within a company. A brand, you know, tied with ethos. It's what does it stand for? What is the company? And I think to a brand, this is important. You know, whether you're Sprite and it, you know, quenches first better than everything else, or Wrangler jeans, it's a bit showing my age there a little bit, but harder than Levi jeans. You know, whatever your brand is, whatever it stands for, you need to make someone, when they hear that brand, have a feeling. It should be tied to a feeling. And you don't want the feeling to be, ooh, you know, like now, Experian, you know, kind of when I was like a teenager, Experian was, you know, and then now it's like, you know, kind of, we have these feelings, and we need to make sure that our brand stays with a positive feeling. You know, you want someone remembering the good time, the good product, the good experience, not so much thinking back like, yeah, they're probably behind all them scam calls I've got since the breach, like, you know, since the breach. So that's all brand is, really, getting people to think positively of your company. And I think, you know, we do so much when it comes from a visual perspective, when it, you know, like if we look at brands, often, you know, what's the point of doing all that if you're not going to learn? I hate to drop SolarWinds as a conversation starter, but it impacts brand. I now think SolarWinds, to me, going back over 10 years, was always that company, InfoSec. It was always the friendly bunch with the good stuff. And now my first thought is something negative when I think of that brand. So yeah, it's avoiding the common pitfalls and trying to just navigate that world, right? Always changing, always digital, you know, confusing stuff sometimes. So yeah.
So thanks for that. I'm going to leave the screen over here for some key takeaways, but something I just wanted to elaborate on some of the discussions that you had there. This is where partnerships come into play a lot, right? Definitely from my consulting days pre me joining Mimecast, when I used to go out and consult, there were a lot of people in charge of security at organizations, right? Again, it's an individual there. They need their partnerships that they work with to say, what is out there? How can I better secure my environment? You know what is out there. You're speaking to 3,000 or 2,000 other organizations out there. Bring your experience into my environment and make my environment safe and secure. So some of the takeaways we have are the threat actors are increasing. The threats are sophisticated. You need to mitigate risk through layered security approaches. We've given a lot of stats over here. There's a lot more that is available out there. You could speak to the Ultimate team, the Mimecast team. It's available, the State of Email Security Report, with a lot of statistics, a lot of UK-specific statistics out there. So please reach out to us. We can assist. That is my parting note. I want to leave a little bit of time for George and Richard to give their parting notes. I haven't seen any questions appear from my side. George, there may have been a question that you could have potentially seen, or Richard, that you've seen. But from my side, I want to thank you very much for engaging with us. Bring up any questions or comments. George, your parting thoughts on this?
I always loved. I actually quite enjoy doing these. These are great. Does anyone have any questions, either from Mimecast or for Richard at all? No one has any questions for me. I'm the sales guy.
Don't even have to be about security. We can can just talk about the weather if you want, if you've got a quick question about what's happening. No. Well, the offer's always there, and I think it's important to, you know, to obviously to have that partnership as we're talking about. But yeah,
I'll give you a quick overview of obviously where we're coming from. It's quite unique actually for a partner of, well, for a business of ours to have one, that the NetSec and the overarching platform security vendor partnerships like we do with Mimecast. However, obviously we've brought the anti-social engineer but into the fold as well. And I'll tell you extremely why it's actually very important, and it's so complementary to one, our Mimecast partnership, is because what we're able to actually do is not only secure you systematically, right, which is where Mimecast sits, and secure users cross-platform, cross-devices, which is it's a staple to all of our security business. But actually, to be able to take that a step further, and as Richard said at the beginning, is actually from a potential hacker's perspective, use subversive techniques to actually test and attack businesses, obviously through programs of choice, and where Mimecast is actually looks and actually stands up to what it says it does. It's very unique for us as a partner to be able to offer both services out, and then to be able to track. And I'm sure Rich will be able to add a little bit more on that.
Yeah, just how it is to me, it falls under that kind of technical wing. You know, we have to target the technology people and processes, but it falls under the technology wing more often than not. And just like, honestly, just kind of, it does make my job harder, you know, not to shill or not to say, oh, Mimecast is the only and the greatest prevention out there. But it is a case of making it harder, and it's a case of taking a technology, putting it in where it's supposed to be, like mail gateways, etc., and just kind of removing some of that risk and going into that multi-layered, multifaceted kind of approach. And that's what Ultima kind of surprised and just kind of really kind of give me confidence, because they're a company that put the money where the mouth is, literally, to make sure that the customers have that kind of security like addition. They've seen that the market isn't a case of one product or another. It's a case of we have to step back and build this general resilience within companies. So it's never just testing, it's never just Mimecast, but it is that kind of mature angle we're aiming for. We'd like all of our customers to be a little bit better off. If it's just some like advice that's needed, or consultancy, etc. But I think just putting that security message first is quite key to me. So yeah, always put it first where you can.
Good. Does anyone have any questions before we close the session out?
No, but is it worth leaving a email address or a follow-up if there is anything?
Yeah, it's going to come up. So everybody will receive a copy of this recording along with transcript and we will also make sure that the Mimecast report is also available for everybody to be able to have a read as well, and along with everybody's emails and contact details if they wanted to just carry on the conversation further. Especially with Mikey and Richard as well, and even myself if needed. But look, thank you very much for your time. I know it's taken a little bit longer than the 45 minutes, 50 minutes than we needed, but your time is extremely valuable, so I would love to give you some time back. And if you do need anything, please do reach out to us. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.